Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
All right, everyone, welcome to today's ASRG webinar. But before we get started, I'd like to tell you a little bit about ASRG and get some of the legal stuff out of the way. ASRG is a nonprofit organization founded to support the development of the automotive security industry. We have developed a platform and a community to share knowledge, communicate through networks, and to build value with collaboration. This is a community for you, built by you, with the goal to protect our friends and family when using automotive products. If you want to learn more about ASRG or get more involved, please visit our website at www.asrg.io or send us an email at hello@asrg.io. Before we jump into the presentation today, let's get some of the legal stuff taken care of. The views and opinions expressed in this webinar are the views of those that have made them. They do not represent views or opinions of ASRG and are to be considered as informational. The use of this information is to be used by the individual and/or organization at their own risk.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. My name is Andrea Amico. I'm the founder and CEO of Privacy4Cars, and welcome to Putting Privacy at the Forefront in Automotive. This is a presentation developed for ASRG, the Automotive Security Research Group. And yes, there is no P for privacy in ASRG. There is an S, and I'm fully aware that security teams around the globe are really being asked increasingly to deal with issues that really belong to privacy. And so this entire presentation is written from the perspective of security people and how they can think about privacy in different ways. And most importantly, how to take privacy out of the halls crowded with lawyers and move them instead in the forefront of your store to turn privacy not from a risk management function only that is legal in its core, but into a source of value for the company, a new area of innovation and competition for you and for your company. So again, my name is Andrea Amico. I am the founder and CEO of Privacy4Cars. At Privacy4Cars, I have the unique privilege of running the first privacy tech companies really focused on vehicle data. Throughout the presentation today, I will show you some examples of how we think about certain problems, and hopefully this will be inspiration for you to do something similar inside your companies. A little bit more about myself. I co-chair the Compliance and Education Committee at the International Automotive Remarketing Alliance. I'm involved with a number of associations. I have a small past and have had the fortune of discovering a few issues related to security in the past and to having to disclose it to heads of manufacturers. I am a former engineering ethics adjunct professor, so really I take ethics and engineering very seriously. In the past, I've been in automotive for over a decade. So today, clearly, this is not a presentation that is for any legal representation. So please do not rely on this content to make legal decisions. This is definitely not a substitute for legal counsel on any of the matters that we'll be discussing today. Again, my hope and mission for today is to help you think through privacy through a very different lens than what you've been thinking throughout so far. So I speak with a good amount of practitioners in security and automotive, and they often tell me that they've been presented a Venn diagram like the one on the left, and it shows that privacy and security can overlap, and usually security is defined as the lock on the door, and privacy is defined as the curtains on your windows. And well, let's look at the bright side, right? Good news is that security is pretty well understood, especially by, of course, security practitioners. Yes, it is the lock on your door, right? Security is really about preventing unauthorized third parties to have access to the data that you have. And in this way, the analogy is actually, pretty good. Here's the other thing that security has going for it. It is, again, well understood. Two, typically there's a budget that is much more significant than for privacy. privacy budget typically tends to be in salaries of lawyers. There's a very wide ecosystem of all sorts of players, from all-encompassing solutions like VSOCs down to very narrow and very specific solutions. Some players are specialized only in, say, encryption. The focus on automotive and security tends to be around the safe operating of components. This is not a sentence I use, frankly, not a sentence I would like to use, because I think the focus should be on safety of individuals, not on components. But this is the kind of language we often see from regulators like National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, or in recent ISOs, or working groups in all sorts of countries. And so again, this is really part of the DNA of automotive, is to focus on the safe operating of components, and arguably for good reasons. The second focus is what is more traditional IT security, and it's being complemented with OT. But again, all of those sectors are pretty well known, and you can expect that more and more investment is going to go into this area, simply because there's a growing list of public and large-scale breaches. And this is where the Venn diagram starts being right. I don't think that defining privacy as the curtains on your windows is anywhere near correct or really helpful. In a engineering, male-dominated industry such as automotive, calling privacy the curtains, I think that most engineers really don't have curtains on their windows, and unless their spouses really, ask them to do it. And so, unfortunately, frames privacy as something that is frivolous, it's form over function, not necessary, an obstacle to doing things in a leaner, more streamlined way. And I think that that's a very, very big issue, because that's not the right way to look at things. I think that the right way to look at things is more like this. Again, I think that security is increasingly having to deal with privacy, simply because the part of security that is not PI is relatively stable, while the part that is dealing with personal information, or PI, is rapidly growing. Non-PI security, for instance, includes anything from physical access to your building to protecting your trade secrets that are really not related to consumers. But the vast majority of the data that companies collect today really has to deal with data that is collected from your customers, which very often are consumers, and data that also in the past was not considered personal information is increasingly being called personal information, either because the definitions in the laws are becoming broader, which is definitely a reality, but also because, thanks to advancements of things like artificial intelligence, data that originally was really hard to reconduct to an individual or a household is increasingly easy to reconduct to an individual in a household, which is the generally accepted definition of what constitutes personal information. So, for instance, patterns of how you brake and accelerate, until recently, people would have argued that this is highly technical data. Reality is that now there's a number of algorithms that allows you to fingerprint individuals and recognize, because each of us has a slightly different pattern, similar to what, by the way, we do in general computing. You can fingerprint people depending on how they type on their keyboards, settings on their browsers, and so on and so forth. So again, data that used to be considered purely technical is increasingly falling under the scope of privacy. The other thing that I want to point out is that our understanding, by having seen data that is collected by a lot of companies, and by seeing some of the public statements made by companies, and by seeing what data has been exposed during breaches, our understanding is that not all data in possession of companies actually meets all the legal requirements that are necessary to really have the data, right? And the reason is because privacy is vastly misunderstood. Privacy is not the curtains on to prevent, your neighbors to peeping in. Privacy is really about only having the data that you have the legal right to have, requirement number one, and only using it for the very specific purposes that you have the rights to use it for. And again, our understanding is that there's a lot of data in companies' databases that does not meet the first or the second requirement, or both. And this is why this audience should be paying more attention to privacy, and this is why you're watching this, because you're interested in it, which is awesome. And privacy is rapidly growing in terms of a legal reputation risk. I mean, I'm recording this on May 23rd. Yesterday, Facebook was dealt a 1.2 billion euros, $1.3 billion fine because they were not meeting, right, those requirements we were talking about on the right. That the European courts have fined them because they're saying that the data that they had in the United States was transferred, but it didn't have the requirements, the legal construct enabled to do that, and that was done unlawfully. So again, they had a lot of data they were not supposed to have, but that they thought that it was okay to have. And again, this is very common. But this is not only about risk management. We see privacy as a growing opportunity in consumer electronics and software, but it has remained vastly untapped as an opportunity for innovation and competition in automotive. We expect this will change very quickly. So today I will focus on three areas specifically. One is the lifetime management and handoff problems. I'll explain in a minute what I mean by that. The second is the representation, or unfortunately often the misrepresentation of data practices of companies in automotive. And the third one is the fact that many companies have wholly inadequate data subject processes, meaning that they do not have robust processes to deal with what the law grants in terms of rights to consumers. Again, this is going to be my focus of today, and we're going to be looking at it from, yes, a risk management perspective, but also how can this be used by companies to innovate and gain a competitive edge in the market? And this is true for anything from OEMs, tier ones, service providers, etc. So let's start with the first one, right? Why do we talk about handoffs? Well, because cars last for a very long time. The average age in the United States right now is 12 and a half years. It's actually pretty consistent across the Western world. And so you can expect your average car to be on the road for 20 plus years. And the problem is that cars collect increasingly amount of information that is considered and regulated as personal information. This collection happens in two ways, either through the growing amount of sensors that we put in cars. It started with weight sensors under the seats, and now it's, driver monitoring systems that capture all sorts of data, including biometrics from consumers. And the other big source that often people don't like to talk about is the devices that people bring into vehicles, and they connect to the car in a variety of ways, anything from local connections like Bluetooth or USB connections to, of course, nowadays, mobile apps that connect remotely through the vehicle through the telematics. The challenge is that for historical reasons, a lot of this data is stored in the car, very often without the understanding of consumers, again, going back to, proper disclosure and consent. And this data is typically stored unencrypted. And so you end up essentially having giant unencrypted hard drives on wheels that exchange hands on a regular basis, sometimes more than 100 times a year. Think of your average rental car, and I'm sure we all had the experience of seeing, other people's data in a car that you have just rented for the day. The reason why we should be all thinking about this is because, and this is not just a manufacturing problem, this is really a retail problem, right? The challenge is really in the B2C part of the relationship, which happens typically at the dealerships, at rental lots, when insurers insure cars, when auto finance companies finance vehicles, etc. So we do a lot of research. Here's, for instance, some of the quotes that consumers told us they were told by sales associates when they were test driving a car. None of your personal information will be saved on navigation because we have an app where only you can see it. No, your system runs on your personal cell phone. It's like mirroring your screen, so there's no data stored in the system in the car. The OEM is not a high-tech company, so we're not going to be saving your information to sell. Your information is on a USB drive right here in the glove compartment. Only you have access to its contents. And of course, my favorite and most common thing that I hear is when you disconnect Bluetooth or unplug the USB from the vehicle, all your data is automatically deleted. Of course, none of these things are true. Not only that, but, this is what we measure. We measure that, when consumers go to dealerships, 2 out of 3 times, dealerships tell them to not worry because they have a process to delete this personal information they're supposed to be protecting. However, our assessment is that fewer than 5% of the dealerships actually have a robust and documented process to do so. And as a consequence, our audits show consistently, and this is true in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, where we've done audits, more than 4 out of 5 cars nowadays are resold, still containing the personal information of consumers stored in the components of the vehicle. And as a consequence, 9 out of 10 mystery shoppers told us that they could find the data of prior users just by test driving 1 or 2 cars of their choice, randomly chosen, from the same dealer lots that told them that they had processes to delete this data. So obviously, they were proven wrong 9 out of 10 times by random visitors. Now, the reason why this matters is because you can easily do things like this. And in the United States alone, where we have, about 40 used million car sales, if my stats are true of 4 out of 5, that means that every year, just with vehicle sales, used car sales, 36 families experience a data breach because cars have not been designed with the proper safeguards of not deleting data. And most importantly, right, on a current status quo of actual cars on the road, companies that own those vehicles have not set up processes to delete data from those vehicles. And in fact, I have, people know that I have an interest in this kind of stuff, and I get on a regular basis calls and emails from people that tell me that they own the car of, a number of celebrities and politicians and wealthy individuals and, whatever else. Now, the reason why you all should be thinking about this is because the manufacturers themselves actually make declaration in their own privacy policies saying that if you are the owner, you are supposed to be the person responsible for deleting the data. Well, putting the burden of consumers, which I think is what they're trying to do, I think is smart if you're a lawyer, but unfortunately has no bearance in the law. And most importantly, owners would include the auto finance companies of these manufacturers. Again, here I have just 2 examples, but these declarations like these are pretty common. So, the auto finance companies are owned by these manufacturers are owners, for instance, when they repossess a vehicle. Insurance companies are owners when, for instance, you end up with a total loss accident. And most importantly, the dealerships of the franchise network of these manufacturers own the vehicle. And yet, despite the fact that we see these declarations in the privacy policy of the manufacturers, we have not seen a single manufacturer yet telling their network of dealers they actually are responsible for doing the things that they say in their privacy policies. Now, the reason why this matters is because, I'm here in the United States, so the FTC has issued guidance multiple times on the fact that, data need to be deleted. But most importantly, in other legislative environments, there is very clear legal guidance that not doing so is a clear violation of the law. The European Data Protection Board, for instance, has issued multiple opinions on this under GDPR and e-privacy. The ICO in the UK similarly has said that companies that knowingly leave data of consumers are in clear violation of the Data Privacy Act. We have similar declarations from the Canada Privacy Commissioners, etc., etc. Most importantly, this is a very well-established practice for computers and smartphones, and essentially all other consumer electronics. Here are a couple of examples of websites of companies here in the United States. They clearly tell you that whenever you return a vehicle return a device to be refurbished, yes, as a consumer, you should already be taking care of this, but if you don't, we actually have a safety net that we lay down for you. Automotive is truly the only sector of consumer electronics, because that's what cars are today, where this is not addressed, despite the fact that, again, there are legal constructs, but also there are very well-established practices. For instance, in the United States, the bar for what good security is, typically people rely in courts, rely on what the National Institute for Standards and Technology says. Well, turns out NIST issued guidelines on this back in 2015, 2016, that deleting data from devices that contain personal information is a minimum reasonable standard, and that needs to be done every single time. So this is how we are dealing with it at Privacy4Cars. We have created the first process to effectively and efficiently manage and execute the deletion of personal information from cars. It's been awarded multiple patents. And most importantly, I'm proud of the fact that we've been able to convince many, many companies that are much larger than ours to start to change their practices and protect millions of consumers at dealerships, auto auctions, fleets, etc., etc. But the reason why I'm bringing this up to you is because there's a lot more work that can be done. If you are working on, for instance, you're a tier 1 supplier, you should be thinking about how to deal with the fact that those components will change hands. And how do you prevent data from person A to go in the hands of person B? So here's one example that I have brought up for the first time in 2017. Amazingly, 6 years later, we have not seen any manufacturer really doing something like this. I think Tesla is somewhere in the area, but by and large, nothing like this has really been implemented into automotive, even though it is very common practice. I think we all have, our streaming accounts, and they all work like this, right? How do you deal with a single device, a TV, that is used by multiple users, and how do I know which content to present based on who's the user? Well, the user experience is that whenever you go and interact with the device, the first thing the device does is to ask you, who are you? And to load up your profile. And potentially, for instance, if you have set parental controls, if you have kids like I do, in your streaming, then you don't want your kids to watch anything that is above PG-13 unless they enter a PIN. Again, this stuff is very common. I've been told in the past it's very basic, and yet apparently it still escapes the realm of automotive. So bad news is that there's a lot more work to be done. Good news is that as security practitioners, you probably can see many examples in your daily lives of consumer electronics that have done a lot of smart things to manage multiple people accessing a single device and how to create safeguards around that you can probably start to implement in your product, and that would give your product an edge versus your competitors. Of course, while protecting consumers, which is always a great thing. So let's switch to topic number 2, which is transparency. So again, we do a lot of mystery shops, and what we realized is that fewer than 1 in 20 dealers correctly told consumers when they were shopping for a car that yes, cars collect personal information, and yes, manufacturers, and by the way, service providers of all sorts, have the rights to sell and share this personal information. And 0 of the about 150 mystery shops we have conducted, in 0 cases, salesperson was accurately able to explain the differences between any 2 vehicles that those consumers had just finished to test drive. And I don't think it's a dealership's fault. The challenge is that this information, and more importantly, the details of this information, are really disclosed in the privacy policies and terms of the manufacturer and service providers, etc. And just for the manufacturer, it takes an average of 2.5 hours to read those documents. And they're complex. They're written in legalese. Right? Not everybody can understand those documents. And at least in the United States and Canada, we have not found any evidence of any collateral produced by the manufacturers that dealerships can make available to consumers to simply explain the data practices of those vehicles. And this is really why we see what we see here on the right-hand side of this page. It's not that dealerships are bad or they want to deceive consumers. I think they're just as misinformed as the average consumer because nobody has actually done the job of educating them. But the problem still remains, right? Because this is what consumers are told on a regular basis. Manufacturers absolutely do not sell to third parties. It would be stupid for them to do that. Or the manufacturer do not sell to third parties. No way. Your information is never sold, no matter what, to anyone or for any reason. That's why we don't have to ask you to sign a piece of paper because they don't do it. Sell your information ever. And then a big misconception is this is strictly against the law, which of course is not true. We do not sell your information. Now, we are not the only people who took notice. We actually saw a report published by the European Union earlier this year. I think it was published January or February of 2023. I put a link in here. I think it's a fabulous read. It's long, but the second half is actually a summary of make by make what the European has found during their mystery shops. And again, they're a study very similar to what we started to do 4 years ago at Privacy4Cars. But what is fascinating here is that they're taking a very interesting position, right? The European Union has sent all these mystery shops. They reached the same conclusion that we have, which is that consumers are told all sorts of things that are not accurate. There are no simple collateral explained data practices. But the position they're taking is not a position of privacy, right? The report explicitly says, look, there are clearly issues under privacy laws. That's not what we're talking about here. What they're talking in this report is the worry that these practices are distorting the market, which is a very, very big potential accusation if you think about it, right? Essentially what they're saying is we have independently assessed the fact that consumers do care about their privacy. And since privacy information is not related to them at the time in which they're purchasing, or by extension, renting, insuring, financing a vehicle, then this is distorting the market, meaning consumers would have made different choices if this information had been transparently presented to them. And this has big implications under competition laws and antitrust, which is a very, very heavily regulated area of the law across the globe. And this is why, again, as security practitioners who may have to deal with these kind of issues, you may want to be thinking about how do we disclose our security and privacy practices for our devices, and how do we make it available to consumers should they want to know about it? Because increasingly regulators are taking the position and not showing it transparently is a big, big problem. So how are we dealing with this at Privacy4Cars? So we just released 2.5 weeks ago a free tool for consumers. Anybody can go to Vehicle Privacy Report. Right now it's available for United States only, but in early June it's going to be available in Canada, and then throughout the summer we're going to be stretching it over the UK and the EU, and then hopefully broader than that. And it's essentially a place where you can go and you can enter the day, and I highly encourage you guys to try it. By entering the bin, you're presenting the following information, right? One, we explain to you in very simple terms how you should be thinking about the car. Consumers really do not understand that cars are highly, highly, highly computerized, and they collect and transmit a lot of data. So we do that in simple, intuitive ways. There's a lot of info buttons. I'm sure you can see them here on the screen. So this is really a giant educational website, right? Then we have a section that lists what all sorts of privacy protections we're aware of that were done in the past. So for instance, if you bought a car at a dealership that does delete data from vehicles, they get credit. Again, it's important for us that who does the right things gets credit in the marketplace, because that's how we create incentives for the invisible hand of the market to operate and reward those companies that do the right thing for privacy. And then, most importantly, it includes the world's first vehicle privacy label. I actually think this is the world's first privacy label for any IoT category. Right now, we cover most, if not all, of the 273 million vehicles in circulation in the United States. And again, very soon we're going to be switching it over Canada and Europe. And what we've done is that we have synthesized those policies that we still refer to. And, if you want to spend, in this example, 144 minutes to read through these documents, you can, and they're easy to find, and they're all in one place. Often just finding this document is very challenging. But what we try to do is to create a set of 10 icons to allow anybody to just take a glance and understand what type of data it is collected and by the manufacturer, and where is it shared and sold to. Again, we use the public declarations of the public documents of manufacturers. And again, we're just starting with manufacturers, but I'm sure you can see the design is modular. And in fact, we already have in our head version 2 and 3 and 4 of this, in which we'll keep stretching what we disclose to consumers. At Privacy4Cars, we track literally hundreds of companies that collect, share, and sell data that is related to vehicles. And we hope that we will stretch the blanket of transparency and lift the fog in which consumers exist deeper and deeper as the time passes by. And then again, all of these buttons are clickable. You can find the actual quotes. And so essentially, we are putting consumers finally in charge of understanding what their vehicle does. And this website also has the ability for consumers to reach out. And in fact, thousands of consumers, tens of thousands of consumers have already gone here to check their vehicle. Hundreds are leaving comments asking us to please advocate with their consumers, with their dealerships or their manufacturers. And the conclusion is that people are upset. Just Monday, Facebook was fined $1.3 billion because data was transferred. And I think by and large, consumers understand, maybe they don't understand, most likely they don't understand what data exactly is collected from them when they're on Facebook and how it's used. And that makes them angry, but at least they understand that they're using their time and their eyeballs to be receiving advertising, and that's what pays for a free service. It is very different, and now we have hard evidence. It is very different when you're asking somebody to pay $10,000, $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 or euros to purchase a vehicle, and you realize that the same is still going on, that your data is being collected and shared and sold in ways that you don't understand. And again, our mission here is to lift this giant fog. And the reason why it matters is because, again, I think that privacy is a fundamental area of competition innovation that is very mature in other industries and that has not reached automotive yet. But there's a number of parallels that you can think about, right? So I often think about the fact that our parents, when they were shopping for a vehicle just a generation ago, they couldn't tell which car was safer. Safety is not something like the comfort of a seat or the color of a car or how big of a trunk or how big of an engine that you can look at and understand as the average person shopping for a vehicle. it was something that was absolutely invisible. I know it sounds laughable and ridiculous today because we live in a very different world, but back then it was just really, really hard to understand what was a safeguard and what it wasn't. And I'm sure that back in the day, dealerships were telling consumers similar things to what they're telling about privacy today, right? You have nothing to worry about. This is a very safe vehicle. That was just not the case. And what it took was for the safety ratings to be published for the first time for a couple of handfuls of vehicles to change the world. And safety stopped being something where the lowest tier of talent that engineering companies went to work on in automotive, and it became an area of competition. I mean, there are brands that were built around this. Still today, at least in the United States, I can tell you that when you ask consumers what's the safest car on the road, they'll tell you it's a Volvo. If you read the current ratings, that's not true anymore. But it doesn't matter. Volvo has built an entire brand. This tiny company out of Sweden has built an entire brand around, if you want a safe car, you should drive ours. And that is really what made them a brand and what brought them into the market and made them, huge gains in market share. But today we see the same effect in privacy in other sectors. Apple is probably the most famous example. They spend over $2 billion a year telling consumers to buy their products because of privacy. And in fact, since they started this campaign of privacy, that's iPhone, Apple went, and this really happened over the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. Apple went from about a third of market share in the United States to now over 50%. Privacy is what made them mainstream, and arguably they are the most successful, most profitable hardware consumer electronics company in the world. And they've done that through a value proposition centered on privacy. And they've done that for two reasons. One is because it was an area where they knew that there was a clear consumer demand, especially in the United States, where regulations are really not that strong compared to other parts of the world. But the other thing that they did is that as they were building a value proposition on privacy, they were shrinking the war chest of companies that were encroaching on the business. Facebook estimates that every year they lose tens of billions of dollars because of the privacy settings on iPhones. And I think it's quite remarkable that Apple has been able to deliver this 1, 2, 3 punch of better brand building, growing sales and market shares, and weakening their opponents. But again, Apple is not the only example. The browsers and search engines, for instance, right? They are all evolving. There are new players that have gained significant market share, and what all those players have in common is that they are positioning themselves as the privacy choice. DuckDuckGo will be the example for search engines, Brave and Firefox for browsing. Now they're embedding premium solutions like VPNs that have turned the browser business from a no revenue business, essentially, into a profitable business, thanks to privacy. The other big example that I think we should all be reflecting upon, because I'm assuming that many of the people listening today work on components of tier 1, 2, and 3 of automotive, is the R2 standard, the responsible recycling standard that exists for essentially all consumer electronics, is not applied for automotive components by and large. And what that standard does is that essentially, companies that do this responsible recycling and brand themselves and badge themselves as responsible recyclers, they essentially promise to do two things. One, they promise they will not be shipping e-waste to third world countries where children burn it up so they can get precious metals out of it, which is horrible for their health and for the environment. The other thing they commit to, which, very squarely sits within this audience today, is they commit to their core 7 principles of data security. Probably the most important one of them is they commit to making sure that data of previous owners and users of the device is gone before that device finds a second life and is handed off to somebody else. So again, we see plenty of examples of companies and industry are changing privacy from a legal reputation risk to a source of differentiation and value. Our mission of Privacy4Cars is to start this journey, and my hope is that today you will want to join into the journey, into the movement. And this brings me into the third area that I wanted to talk to you about, which is how are companies prepared to deal with the rights that consumers are increasingly gaining around the world? And the answer is, well, it's pretty terrible. Okay, we do a lot of studies. Again, here for illustration purpose, I'm using one that we did last summer. We placed almost 4,000 data subject requests in California. California has very special laws, similar to the European Union, by the way, in which consumers have the right to request their data to be gone. In California specifically, companies are mandated to respond within 45 days. But as you can see, only 20% of those requests were responded on time. 14% were answered late, even though the law allows for an extension if you have reasons for that, but nobody claimed extensions. What is even more important is that 2/3 went completely unanswered. Now, there are statutory damages for this at $750 a request. So that means that, us just by doing a small test, we could have, if this data was visible to the Attorney General of California, this would have yielded $2 million in fines for literally a small experiment. And what's amazing is that among the hundreds of companies that never answered, this includes repair companies, automotive manufacturers, automotive data brokers, and some very visible, large, high-tech companies that power all sorts of services inside vehicles. The other thing I want to flag that is important, because in a security profession, you probably see what's in your database, is that we see way too many claims of our data is anonymized, so we don't need to respond. And every time we got one of those claims from any of those respondents, said, that's fine. Can you please send us a sample of your database of your anonymized data so we can actually verify it meets the requirements of the law, that it cannot be easily reconducted to an individual or a household. I'm sure you can guess it. How many companies decided to do that? That's zero. And I think it's problematic. I think it underlies the fact that companies probably know that a lot of the data they have does not meet the anonymization requirement set by the law. And again, they're vastly unprepared to handle agents' requests. What we proposed, learning after doing this experiment, is why don't we create a standard API across the industry in which somebody like us can place requests to all sorts of third parties, manufacturer, tier one, service providers, whatever, insurance companies, etc. And once we establish a standard, there's a standard way to receive and respond. This is, a one-time setup, extremely cheap to operate. Just by comparison, just realize this, that responding to a data request is estimated to cost somewhere between $100 and $1,000 per request for companies. And so, creating an ecosystem where this stuff is actually done automatically through API, through standards, really has massive benefits, not just for consumers and for companies, but you can literally scale this up and manage and offer a value proposition to consumers around this, and with a bunch of other benefits. So if you're listening and you're interested in doing more like this, please, let me know. We would love to collaborate with you. But this is the path that we are taking at Privacy4Cars, because our mission is to make privacy much greater than data monetization. Right now, there is too much focus on extracting data from consumers and use it in ways that consumers do not understand to create all sorts of models that are very similar to what social media is doing. And my hope is that we can spare automotive a lot of the pain that social media is going through right now. And so we do this in three ways. One is that our mission is to always find and share the truth. And that's why we do a lot of research. We create websites like, Vehicle Privacy Report, because we want to educate and make privacy visible. The second thing we always try to do is to change economics and opportunity for those players that want to embrace privacy as part of value, right? So we do this in two ways. We make it cheaper, faster, better to comply with the laws, but also we try to make it easy to turn privacy into a source of value, and vice versa. How, we have ways to reward companies that do the right things. And whenever they don't, then we help players that want to create a value proposition around privacy, shifting legal responsibilities and cost to the players that are not engaging in this ethical behavior. So how can you all be part of this journey that I think if we all followed, we would leave the world in a much better place? 4 parting thoughts for you. One is, again, think about the fact that it's very normal for vehicles to exchange hands. They last a very long time. They're sold multiple times. When they're shared and rented, they have to be shared and rented a lot of times. So it is absolutely abnormal to not have robust handoff management. And this goes all the way to the origin on how components are designed to interact and manage different identities, all the way down to the nitty-gritty, existing cars on the road, what processes need to be in place to protect consumers. Second thought is put consumers first and commit to privacy. Again, I think it's very important that we leave this fog in which people don't understand that their cars collect a lot of data. It goes in all the places and used in ways that they do not understand. And again, there's ways to build a value proposition around that. The third thought is just look at what other companies are doing in other consumer electronic niches and verticals, because there are plenty of best practices that are commonplace over there that have not been adopted. And so the good news is that you can take ideas that have been proven in the marketplace in other sectors, bring them to automotive, and build a value proposition for your company. Not to mention, of course, doing the right thing by consumers. And then I just encourage all of you that have been on the line to start reading about privacy by design practices. You can find anything from very short articles to very thoughtful books about the topic. I think it's very, very, very important we all start within, privacy and security are different things, but I think if more security folks had an eye on privacy and just didn't take the word of the lawyers that everything is fine because we got some sort of consent in place. I think if we start to think about privacy by design, which by the way is a legal requirement in many countries, we're all going to be living in a better world, and your company is going to be more successful, and you will be personally more successful in your career. So thank you for the time. If you want to reach out in ways to collaborate, for instance, on that transparent API, and also, if you have any other ideas or comments, please reach out at info@privacy4cars.com. Again, my name is Andrea Amico. I'm the founder of Privacy4Cars. And you can find more information about us and what we do at privacy4cars.com. And please, again, go and punch in the VIN of your own car on vehicleprivacyreport.com and leave us your thoughts. I'd be curious to know what you think. Thank you very much again to you and ASRG. Have a fantastic day.